The calm before the storm. The day started like any other sunny afternoon, where the air was thick with anticipation and the scent of freshly popped corn. The amusement park sprawled across acres of lush green lawns, dotted with colorful rides that seemed to beckon every passerby with the promise of joy and excitement. Laughter bubbled up from all corners of the park, and the screech of roller coasters echoed in the background, blending with the upbeat carnival music that filled the air. Maria Santiago, a woman in her late 30s, sat in her wheelchair just beyond the gates, her heart filled with both excitement and anxiety. This was meant to be a special day, one she had meticulously planned for weeks. Her son, Nathan, a lively 7-year-old, was bouncing in place next to her, his small hands fidgeting with the straps of his backpack. His eyes sparkled with the thrill of what the day promised. "Mom, can we go to the bumper cars first?" Nathan asked, tugging at her sleeve as he looked up at her with wide, eager eyes. Maria smiled down at her son. "We'll do the bumper cars, the Ferris wheel, and anything else you want, sweetheart," she said softly, trying to suppress the gnawing discomfort that tugged at her abdomen. She was 8 months pregnant, and the complications that came with it had placed her in a wheelchair. It was a temporary situation, but the exhaustion weighed heavily on her, both physically and mentally. Her husband, Adam, had promised to join them later in the day. As an FBI agent, his work often came with unpredictable hours, but today was supposed to be different. He had managed to take some time off, and Maria had been counting on him to be with her and Nathan for this outing. But for now, it was just the two of them. Maria adjusted herself in her chair, wincing slightly at the sharp pain that shot through her back. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the cold metal rims of her wheelchair as she pushed forward, navigating the wide pathways that snaked through the amusement park. As they approached the designated entrance for visitors with disabilities, Maria felt a sense of relief. The park had done an admirable job of accommodating people like her, and she was grateful for that. She could see the entrance ahead, a small gate with a sign that read "Accessibility Entrance" in bold letters. Nathan ran ahead, his face lighting up as he spotted the rides in the distance. "Hurry, Mom," he called out, bouncing on the balls of his feet. I'm coming," Maria laughed, her heart swelling with love for her son. He had been so patient through her difficult pregnancy, understanding that his mother couldn't move as fast or do as much as she used to. As she rolled toward the entrance, Maria noticed a man standing by the gate. He was a security guard, mid-40s, with a thick build and a stern expression. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his eyes were locked onto her as if assessing whether she belonged there. Something about the way he stared made Maria's skin prickle with discomfort. She tried to push aside her unease. After all, he was just doing his job right. There was no reason to be suspicious of her. She approached the gate with a polite smile, already reaching for the folder that contained her medical documents. She had come prepared for any questions about her wheelchair use. "Hello," Maria greeted the guard warmly. "We're here to use the accessible entrance. I have my papers if you need to see them." The guard barely acknowledged her, his gaze flicking from Maria to Nathan, then back to Maria. He uncrossed his arms and took a step forward, his expression hardening. "You sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his voice thick with skepticism. His words were blunt, carrying a coldness that immediately put Maria on edge. Her smile faltered. "Yes, this is the accessible entrance, isn't it? I have the necessary documents if you need them." The guard gave her a long, disdainful look, his eyes narrowing as if he was scrutinizing her for any signs of deception. "We've had a lot of people trying to take advantage of this entrance lately," he said, his voice gruff. "I need to make sure you actually need it." Maria's stomach tightened. She had heard stories like this before, of people being questioned or judged simply because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what disabled looked like. But here, in a place where she just wanted to have a fun day with her son, it stung more than she expected. "I understand your concern," Maria said, doing her best to keep her voice calm and measured. "But I have my medical documents right here." She held up the folder, hoping the papers would be enough to diffuse the situation. The guard glanced briefly at the folder, but didn't make any move to take it from her. Instead, he crossed his arms again and stared down at her with a sneer. "You don't look like you need a wheelchair," he said. "We've had people try to fake it before, you know." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, trying to process what he had just said. A wave of anger surged through her, but she forced it down. Getting angry wouldn't help. She had to stay calm, for Nathan's sake. "I'm not faking anything," Maria said, her voice firm but restrained. "I have complications with my pregnancy that require me to use a wheelchair. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to spend the day with my son." Nathan, sensing his mother's discomfort, stepped closer to her, his small hand gripping the armrest of her wheelchair. He looked up at her with wide, worried eyes. "Mommy, is everything okay?" Maria forced a smile, even though her heart was pounding. "It's fine, sweetie. We're just talking to the guard." The guard, however, was unmoved. He took another step forward, looming over her. "I'm going to need more than just some papers," he said, his voice cold. "Anyone can get a doctor to sign off on something." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't happening. She had done everything right, followed the rules, and yet here she was, being treated like she didn't belong. Like she was trying to scam her way into something she didn't deserve. "Please," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. "I'm not trying to cheat the system. I just want to take my son to the rides. I can show you my documents again." "That won't be necessary," the guard interrupted, his tone dismissive. "I'm calling this in." Maria's heart dropped into her stomach as the guard pulled out a radio from his belt and began speaking into it. He didn't even look at her as he reported the situation, his words clipped and official. "We've got a possible fraud at the accessible entrance," he said into the radio. "Requesting backup." Maria's pulse quickened. Backup? Was he serious? She wasn't causing any trouble. She had all the necessary documents. Why was this happening? She glanced around, noticing that a small crowd had started to form. People were watching, whispering among themselves, their curious gazes making her feel even more exposed and vulnerable. She could feel the weight of their judgment, as if they were all silently questioning whether she really belonged in that wheelchair. Her hands tightened on the wheels of her chair, her knuckles turning white. She couldn't believe this was happening. All she wanted was to enjoy a day with her son, but now it seemed like everything was spiraling out of control. As the minutes dragged on, the tension grew thicker. Maria tried to calm herself, but her mind was racing. She didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to scare Nathan, but she also didn't know what would happen when the backup arrived. Would they believe her, or would they side with the guard, assuming the worst because of how she looked? Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens reached her ears, and she felt her chest tighten with fear. The arrival of the officer. The distant wail of the sirens grew louder, slicing through the cacophony of the amusement park's cheerful atmosphere. What had been a peaceful, sunny afternoon was quickly unraveling into something Maria couldn't have anticipated. Her hands trembled slightly on the armrests of her wheelchair, and her eyes darted between the approaching police cruiser and her son, Nathan, whose face had gone from excited to anxious in mere moments. Maria felt an overwhelming sense of dread as the flashing blue and red lights drew nearer. She had dealt with her fair share of hardships throughout her life, but nothing quite like this. It wasn't just the injustice of being questioned for needing a wheelchair. It was the looming uncertainty of how this situation might escalate. "I just want to go on the rides," Nathan mumbled, almost to himself, his voice small and sad. Maria's heart ached as she looked down at her son, whose innocence was slowly being crushed by the weight of what was happening. She reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder, despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "It's going to be okay, Nathan," she whispered, though the conviction in her words was more for her own sake than his. "Just stay close to me, all right?" As the police car pulled up beside the entrance, the park's security guard straightened his posture, his demeanor suddenly that of someone who believed they were about to be vindicated. His fingers drummed rhythmically against his hip, his eyes flicking from Maria to the officer who had stepped out of the vehicle. The officer, a broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and a severe expression, surveyed the scene with practiced detachment. His name tag read Officer J. Thompson, and the way he carried himself spoke of years of experience in dealing with tense situations. But as he walked toward them, his gaze met Maria's for the briefest of moments, and she detected something in his eyes, a flash of impatience, perhaps even annoyance. Maria inhaled deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. She had seen enough news stories to know how quickly things could go wrong in situations like this. A wrong word, a misinterpreted gesture, or an assumption made too hastily, and things could spiral out of control. Thompson's gaze shifted to the security guard, who wasted no time stepping forward to explain the situation as if he were reporting a major crime. "Officer, I've got a woman here trying to use the accessible entrance, but I think she's faking it," the guard said, his voice low but authoritative. "She's got some papers, but I'm not buying it. We've had too many people taking advantage of this system." Maria's blood boiled at the accusation, but she bit her tongue. She wanted to shout, to scream that she wasn't faking anything, that she had every right to be here. But she couldn't afford to lose her composure now, not with Nathan watching, not with this officer sizing her up like she was some kind of criminal. Officer Thompson turned toward Maria, his face unreadable. "Ma'am, can I see your identification and those documents the guard mentioned?" Maria nodded quickly, fumbling slightly as she reached for her folder. Her hand shook as she retrieved the papers, medical records from her doctor outlining the complications of her pregnancy and the need for a wheelchair due to her restricted mobility. She handed them over, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it echoed in her ears. Nathan, still gripping the handle of her wheelchair, looked up at the officer with wide, confused eyes. "Why is the policeman here, Mommy?" he whispered, his voice quivering. Maria swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay, baby. He just wants to check our papers. Everything's going to be fine." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. Would everything really be fine? Would the officer actually take the time to look at the documents, or would he side with the guard who had already made up his mind about her? Thompson flipped through the papers, his eyes scanning the pages with a practiced efficiency. For a moment, hope fluttered in Maria's chest. Maybe he would see the truth, that she was telling the truth, and that this was all just a misunderstanding. But then, the officer handed the papers back to her, his expression still blank. "These are from your doctor, correct?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes," Maria replied, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I've had complications with my pregnancy. That's why I need the wheelchair. It's all in the documents." Thompson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to the guard again. "And you think she's faking it?" The guard nodded, his mouth twisted into a smirk. "Look, officer, I've seen a lot of people try to pull stunts like this. They get a doctor to sign off on something, and then they get all the perks of using the accessible entrances, skipping lines, getting special treatment. I'm just trying to protect the integrity of the system here." Maria's jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to skip any lines or get special treatment," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I just want to enjoy the day with my son." The guard raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed with her words. "That's what they all say." Thompson looked between them, his brow furrowing slightly. For a moment, Maria thought he might actually be considering her side of the story. But then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I understand this is frustrating," he said, his voice a bit softer now, as if he were trying to placate her. "But the guard has a right to question people using this entrance. We've had issues with fraud in the past, and it's our job to make sure that the accommodations are being used properly." Maria's stomach twisted. "But I've given you all the proof you need," she argued, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm not faking anything. I have a legitimate medical condition. Thompson nodded, but there was a hint of reluctance in his eyes. I understand, but the policy here is clear. If the staff at the park isn't satisfied with the documentation, they have the right to deny access until further verification is made. Further verification. Maria felt the ground shift beneath her. What more could she possibly provide? She had her doctor's notes, her identification, and the wheelchair that she had been using for months. What more did they want from her? This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for the officer to hear. Thompson sighed again, this time more audibly. Look, I'm not saying you're in the wrong, but from the park's perspective, they need to ensure that no one is abusing the system. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. Abusing the system? I'm pregnant, for God's sake. I'm not here to scam Mignon. Nathan clung to her arm now, his eyes filling with tears. Mommy, why are they being mean to you? Maria's heart shattered at the sight of her son's confusion and fear. She pulled him close, her hand resting protectively on his small back. It's okay, Nathan. Mommy's going to make this right. But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at the edges of her confidence. How could she make this right when the guard and the officer seemed to have already decided she was in the wrong? Thompson turned back to the guard. Is there any way we can resolve this without escalating things further? He asked, sounding weary. The guard crossed his arms again, shaking his head. Unless she can provide more proof, I'm not letting her through. More proof. The words echoed in Maria's mind, mocking her. What else could she possibly give them? Her medical history was laid out in black and white, signed by her doctor. She had nothing left to offer. Maria looked up at Thompson, her eyes pleading. Please, she said softly. I've done everything right. I've followed the rules. I just want to take my son on the rides. Is that too much to ask? The officer hesitated, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. For a brief moment, Maria thought she saw a flicker of empathy in his eyes. But before he could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. What seems to be the problem here? Maria turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing at the edge of the crowd, dressed in casual clothes, but with an unmistakable air of authority, was her husband, Adam. His presence was commanding, and the badge clipped to his belt caught the sunlight as he stepped forward. Maria had never been more relieved to see him. The FBI badge and the shift in tides. Maria's heart skipped a beat as she saw Adam approaching, his face a blend of calm and focused intensity. She had always admired his composure, the way he could command attention without ever raising his voice. It was one of the traits that made him an exceptional FBI agent. Now, more than ever, she was grateful for his ability to step into difficult situations and take control with quiet authority. Nathan, sensing his father's presence, broke into a relieved grin. "Daddy," he exclaimed, running toward Adam, his small hands reaching up for comfort. Adam knelt down briefly, enveloping their son in a tight hug, whispering something into Nathan's ear that immediately seemed to soothe the boy's frazzled nerves. Maria felt a rush of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of strength. As Adam rose to his feet, his eyes now locked onto the security guard and Officer Thompson. There was no doubt about it. Her husband was about to change the dynamics of this entire confrontation. "What's going on here?" Adam asked, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of authority that immediately commanded attention. Officer Thompson, clearly unaware of who Adam was, turned to him with a look of mild annoyance, as if he were just another bystander interfering in the situation. "Sir, this is a matter of park policy. Please step back and allow us to handle it." Adam's eyes flicked to Maria, and she saw the subtle shift in his expression. The tightening of his jaw, the barely perceptible narrowing of his eyes. She could tell he was processing the situation, assessing the scene in front of him like he would any investigation. And in that moment, Maria knew he wasn't going to just step back. With a calm, deliberate motion, Adam reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his badge, flashing it in front of Officer Thompson's face with a crisp flick of his wrist. "Adam Santiago, FBI," he said, his voice even but firm. "And you will explain to me exactly what's going on with my wife." The sudden reveal of Adam's position as an FBI agent instantly shifted the atmosphere. Officer Thompson's eyes widened slightly, his posture stiffening as he realized the gravity of the situation. The guard, who had been standing with an air of smug self-righteousness just moments earlier, took a half-step backward, his confidence visibly faltering. Adam's badge, gleaming in the sunlight, acted like a shield for Maria, one that deflected the judgment and suspicion that had been cast upon her since the moment she approached the accessible entrance. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Maria felt the weight of the situation beginning to lift. Thompson cleared his throat, now addressing Adam with much more respect. "Sir, we were responding to a report from the park's security staff. The guard here suspected that your wife might be, taking advantage of the accessible entrance without proper need." Adam raised an eyebrow, his gaze moving between the officer and the guard. "Without proper need." He repeated slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "My wife is 8 months pregnant. She has medical complications that require her to use a wheelchair. She has provided all the necessary documentation, and yet she's being treated like a criminal. Explain to me how that makes sense." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria watched as Officer Thompson struggled for a response, clearly aware that the situation had taken a turn for the worse. The guard, who had been so eager to assert his authority moments earlier, now looked pale and uncertain. He glanced at Thompson, as if silently pleading for backup, but the officer seemed at a loss for how to proceed. Adam didn't wait for them to formulate a response. He stepped closer, his voice low but laced with an intensity that left no room for misunderstanding. "You see that boy over there?" He pointed to Nathan, who was standing quietly now, watching his parents with wide eyes. "That's my son. He's 7 years old. And because of you two, he's had to witness his mother being treated with complete disrespect. You've put my family through unnecessary stress. And for what? A power trip." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Maria could see that Adam was holding himself back, controlling his anger with the same precision that made him such an effective agent. But underneath his calm exterior, she knew he was furious. "I already given you my documents," Maria added, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "Everything you need to verify my condition is right here. And yet you've chosen not to believe me. Why? Because I don't fit some stereotype of what a person in need looks like. Because I'm a black woman in a wheelchair." The rawness in her words made the guard flinch. He opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it, clearly unsure of what to say. The crowd that had gathered around them had grown larger now, and whispers rippled through the onlookers as they took in the scene. Some were murmuring in support of Maria, while others simply watched in stunned silence, no doubt realizing that they were witnessing something far more serious than a simple misunderstanding. Officer Thompson finally seemed to find his voice. "Sir," he began, addressing Adam, "we didn't mean to cause any distress. We're just following procedure." The guard here was concerned about. Adam cut him off, his eyes flashing. "Concerned about what, exactly?" "Concerned that a pregnant woman might be trying to scam her way onto a Ferris wheel. Does that sound logical to you?" Thompson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Adam stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper that only those directly involved could hear. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to my wife. Right now. And then we're going to put this entire incident behind us." Maria watched as Thompson's face hardened. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially not by someone he had initially viewed as just another member of the public. But Adam's FBI badge and the weight of his authority left little room for argument. And more importantly, Adam wasn't asking. He was telling them how this was going to go. The guard, realizing the situation was well beyond his control, stepped forward with a visible gulp. I'm sorry, Mom," he stammered, his eyes avoiding hers. "I didn't mean to, make things difficult for you. We just have to be careful with the system." Maria stared at him, the apology doing little to soothe the hurt and humiliation she had felt. But she wasn't going to let this man ruin the day any further. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice clipped but calm. "I appreciate the apology." Officer Thompson, sensing the tension, nodded. "Ma'am, I apologize as well. We didn't intend to cause any harm. It was just park policy. But I see now that there was a misunderstanding." Adam didn't move, his eyes still locked onto the officers. "Make sure this doesn't happen again. To anyone." Thompson nodded, clearly eager to end the confrontation. "Understood." With that, the officer turned and motioned for the guard to step back, signaling the end of the standoff. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her, though it was tempered by the lingering sting of the entire ordeal. She reached for Nathan's hand, pulling him close to her side as she let out a slow, steady breath. Adam walked over to Maria, his stern expression softening as he knelt beside her wheelchair. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle now. Maria nodded, though she could still feel the tremors of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to get out of here." Adam smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We will, I promise." But before they could leave, Nathan tugged at Maria's sleeve, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Mommy, are we still going on the Ferris wheel?" Maria's heart clenched at the simple question. She had been so consumed by the tension of the situation that she had almost forgotten why they were here in the first place, to give Nathan a fun day at the park. She looked down at her son, his face so full of hope and innocence, and felt a surge of determination. "Of course we are," she said, forcing a smile. "Let's go have some fun." And with that, they turned away from the entrance and headed toward the Ferris wheel, leaving the tension and the hurt behind them. A day rekindled, but shadows linger. The giant Ferris wheel stood in the distance, its colorful gondolas slowly rotating against the backdrop of the blue sky. The cheerful sounds of the amusement park had returned, filling the air once more with the laughter of children, the distant rumble of roller coasters, and the soft hum of carnival music. But for Maria, the joy of the park had dimmed somewhat, replaced by a lingering feeling of unease. She glanced at Adam, who was walking beside her, his hand resting protectively on the handle of her wheelchair. Nathan skipped ahead, his earlier anxiety seemingly forgotten as he pointed excitedly at the rides around him. "Mom, look, they've got a merry-go-round, and the bumper cars." Nathan's excitement was contagious, and despite everything, Maria found herself smiling. She wanted so badly for the day to return to the light-hearted adventure they'd originally planned. A day where her son could simply enjoy being a child, free of the tension and fear that had crept into their family's life during the confrontation. Adam gave her a reassuring glance, his eyes softening as he saw her smile. "You okay?" he asked again, though this time his voice was gentler, as if the question wasn't about the confrontation with the park staff, but about something deeper. Maria nodded, though her heart still carried the weight of what had transpired. "I will be," she said softly, reaching for his hand and squeezing it. "Thank you for stepping in back there. I didn't know how to handle it anymore." Adam's grip tightened around her hand. "You shouldn't have had to handle it," he said, his voice laced with a quiet but fierce protectiveness. "What happened wasn't right, and I'm sorry you had to go through that." Maria sighed, glancing around at the park as they slowly made their way toward the Ferris wheel. The incident with the guard and Officer Thompson had left her shaken, but more than that, it had awakened feelings she'd been trying to suppress for years. The looks of doubt, the questioning of her motives simply because she didn't fit the stereotype of someone who needed help. It wasn't the first time she had encountered prejudice, but experiencing it in front of her son had made it all the more painful. "I just don't understand," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the din of the park. "I had all the documents. I did everything right. Why wasn't that enough?" Adam was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. He knew how deeply these moments affected Maria, how each instance of discrimination felt like a fresh wound, one that never quite healed. He could protect her physically, but there was little he could do to shield her from the emotional toll of living in a world that so often judged her unfairly. Some people, Adam began, choosing his words carefully, they see the world through a very narrow lens. They've made up their minds about who deserves what before they even know the facts. It's not about you, Maria. It's about their own ignorance. Maria nodded, though the explanation offered little comfort. It wasn't something she hadn't already told herself 1,000 times before. But knowing the root of the problem didn't make it any easier to face, especially when she was just trying to live her life and provide a normal childhood for Nathan. I just don't want him to grow up thinking this is normal, Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. She glanced at Nathan, who was now tugging at Adam's arm, asking him when they could go on the Ferris wheel. I don't want him to think this is how people should treat us. Adam knelt down beside her wheelchair, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart ache. He won't, Adam said firmly, because we're going to show him something better. He's going to grow up knowing that respect and kindness matter more than anything, and he'll understand that what happened today wasn't right, but that it doesn't define who we are. Maria smiled, a genuine smile this time, though there was still a trace of sadness in her eyes. She trusted Adam's words because she knew the kind of man he was, one who fought for justice, not just in his professional life, but in their personal lives as well. And she knew that with Adam by her side, Nathan would grow up with the right values, with the strength to face whatever challenges the world threw at him. As they reached the base of the Ferris wheel, Nathan jumped up and down in excitement. Can we ride now? Please, please. His earlier fear seemed a distant memory as he eagerly tugged at Adam's sleeve. Adam laughed, ruffling Nathan's hair. All right, buddy, let's get on the Ferris wheel. The park employee manning the ride smiled warmly as they approached, a sharp contrast to the encounter they had endured earlier. He looked down at Maria with genuine kindness in his eyes. You all ready to ride? He asked, gesturing toward one of the gondolas that had just come to a stop. Yes, we are, Maria said, smiling back at the man, relieved to be treated with basic decency after the ordeal they'd been through. Adam helped her maneuver into the gondola, taking extra care to ensure she was comfortable, before lifting Nathan into the seat next to her. The Ferris wheel began its slow ascent, the gondola swaying gently as they rose above the park. Nathan pressed his face against the glass, pointing at the rides below with wide-eyed wonder. Look, I can see everything from up here, he exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. Maria leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment as the cool breeze washed over her. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of peace, high above the noise and chaos of the park. It was easy to forget about the confrontation, the looks, the judgment. Up here, it was just her, Adam, and Nathan, a family, together, far removed from the ugliness of the world below. Adam reached over and took her hand, his thumb gently tracing circles on her palm. We'll get through this, Maria, he whispered, his voice low and reassuring. I know today was hard, but we'll get through it. Maria opened her eyes, looking out at the sprawling view of the park. The Ferris wheel continued its slow, steady rotation, offering glimpses of the city skyline in the distance. It was a reminder that the world was vast, full of people and experiences that could be both beautiful and painful. And while today had been difficult, it wasn't the end of their story. It was just one chapter, one moment in the grand tapestry of their lives. I know we will, she said softly, leaning her head against Adam's shoulder. But sometimes it just feels like it's never ending, you know. Like no matter how far we've come, there's always someone waiting to remind us that we don't belong. Adam was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. I know, and I wish I could make it all go away. But what I do know is that every time we face something like this, we get stronger. You're stronger than anyone I know, Maria. And Nathan, He's going to grow up seeing that strength. That's what matters. Maria smiled, squeezing his hand. Adam's words, as always, brought her comfort, even when the weight of the world felt too heavy to bear. He had a way of seeing the light in the darkness, of finding hope even in the most difficult moments. And today, as they sat together on the Ferris wheel, surrounded by the laughter and joy of the park, Maria allowed herself to believe that things would get better. As the ride slowly came to a stop, Nathan turned to them with a wide grin. "Can we go on the bumper cars next?" Maria laughed, shaking her head. "You're full of energy today, aren't you?" Nathan nodded eagerly. "Yeah. Come on, let's go." Adam stood up and helped Maria out of the gondola, his arm steadying her as she adjusted herself in her wheelchair. They made their way back toward the main path, Nathan skipping ahead, his excitement contagious. As they walked, Maria glanced around the park, taking in the sights and sounds with new eyes. The confrontation from earlier still lingered in her mind, but it no longer consumed her. She had faced the challenge, and with Adam by her side, she had come out stronger. And as she watched Nathan laughing and running ahead, she knew that no matter what obstacles came their way, they would face them together. Because in the end, that was all that mattered: their family, their love, and the strength they found in each other. Echoes of strength. As they left the Ferris wheel behind, the laughter of Nathan running ahead toward the bumper cars reminded Maria that, despite everything, they still had a day to salvage. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but the resilience she had always prided herself on was beginning to return. She could feel it in the steady beat of her heart, the calming presence of Adam at her side, and the way Nathan bounced ahead, his happiness contagious. It was moments like these that reminded Maria what truly mattered. She had fought through so much in her life, and this was just one more hurdle. But as she rolled down the path, Adam beside her and Nathan leading the way, the earlier confrontation still lingered at the back of her mind like a dark cloud that refused to fully dissipate. There was something about it that gnawed at her, even in the warmth of the afternoon sun. They soon arrived at the bumper cars, where Nathan's eyes lit up with excitement. "Daddy, can we go on this one now?" he asked, already tugging Adam's sleeve toward the line. Adam laughed and nodded. "All right, buddy. Let's get some tickets and have some fun." As Nathan dashed ahead to look at the brightly colored cars, Adam took a moment to glance at Maria, who had remained quiet. He knelt beside her wheelchair, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure you're okay? You've been awfully quiet since the Ferris wheel." Maria looked at him and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm all right, really," she said softly. "I just can't seem to shake what happened earlier. I know it's over, but—" Adam's gaze softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "You don't have to explain. I get it," he said gently. "It's hard to move past something like that, especially when it feels so personal." Maria nodded. She appreciated how Adam always seemed to know what to say, how he never pressured her to rush through her emotions. He understood the layers of what had happened earlier, not just the obvious injustice, but the deeper cuts it had made. It wasn't just about being questioned, it was about being doubted, dehumanized, made to feel like she had to prove her worth. "There's always that moment," she said quietly, more to herself than to Adam, "where I wonder if it's ever going to stop. If I'll ever just be seen for who I am, not what people assume about me." Adam squeezed her hand, his expression filled with empathy. "You will. Maybe not by everyone, but by the people who matter, and that's what counts." Maria looked into his eyes and felt a swell of gratitude for him. She leaned forward and kissed him gently on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Adam smiled, his hand resting on the back of her wheelchair as he stood up. "You'd be just as strong as you are now," he said. "I'm just lucky enough to be along for the ride." They shared a quiet moment before Nathan came rushing back, his face beaming with excitement. "I'm ready. Come on, let's go." Adam ruffled Nathan's hair and gave Maria a wink. Let's go crash some cars." Nathan was bouncing with anticipation as Adam and Maria followed him toward the bumper car coup. Adam took Nathan by the hand, and they waited in line together, while Maria sat off to the side, watching them. She could see the joy on Nathan's face, the way his eyes sparkled with excitement as he and Adam talked about which car they were going to choose. It was moments like these that made the struggles worth it. The chance to see her son happy, free from worry, enjoying the world with the innocence only a child could possess. As the line moved forward, Maria noticed a group of teenage boys standing a few feet away, whispering and glancing in her direction. Her heart sank. She had seen those kinds of looks before. Half curiosity, half mockery. They were trying to be discreet, but she could hear snippets of their conversation. "Do you think she's faking it too?" One boy snickered. Another one shrugged, eyeing her wheelchair. "Who knows? People do anything these days to get special treatment." Maria's stomach twisted. She had thought she could let go of what had happened earlier, but the boys' comments brought it all rushing back. It wasn't just the security guard or Officer Thompson. It was the pervasive doubt, the constant questioning of her integrity, simply because she didn't fit someone's idea of what it meant to need help. For a moment, she felt paralyzed, unsure of whether to confront them or just let it go. Her mind raced through scenarios. If she said something, would they mock her even more? Would they escalate it? What if Adam overheard and things got out of control? Before she could decide, one of the boys nudged his friend and whispered something that made them all laugh. Maria clenched her fists, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to shout at them for their ignorance, but the words caught in her throat. Suddenly, one of the boys' laughter stopped, and he stiffened. Maria followed his gaze and saw Adam approaching. He had caught the tail end of their conversation, and the look on his face was enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. Adam walked up to the boys, his stance calm but authoritative. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with an unmistakable warning. The boys exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado quickly dissipating. No, sir," one of them stammered, clearly intimidated by Adam's towering presence. Adam didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at them, his gaze piercing. The silence stretched on long enough for the boys to shift uncomfortably, clearly realizing they had miscalculated who they were dealing with. "Good," Adam finally said, his voice firm, "because I'd hate to think you were making fun of someone who's been through more than you could ever imagine." The boys quickly mumbled their apologies, their faces flushed with embarrassment, and shuffled away, their earlier confidence shattered. Adam watched them go, his expression unreadable, before turning back to Maria. He didn't need to say anything. His actions had spoken louder than words ever could. Maria felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Adam had always been her protector, but more than that, he had a way of standing up for what was right without ever resorting to anger or aggression. It was part of what had made her fall in love with him all those years ago. As Adam returned to her side, Nathan came running over, oblivious to the tense exchange that had just occurred. "Where next, Mommy? Come watch us." Maria smiled, nodding at her son as Adam gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go have fun," she said, watching as Adam led Nathan toward the bumper cars. She could see Nathan's wide grin and the way he looked up at his father with admiration. In moments like these, she knew Nathan was learning more about strength and kindness than any words could teach. She watched as they climbed into the bumper cars, laughing and shouting as they playfully collided with each other and the other riders. The sound of Nathan's laughter floated through the air, and Maria felt herself relax, her earlier tension slowly melting away. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to forget the ugliness of the day, the confrontation, the doubt, the whispers, and focused on the joy in front of her. Nathan's giggles, Adam's smile, the way they both lit up with every bump and swerve of the car. As she watched them, Maria realized something important. This was what mattered. No matter how many times she was judged, no matter how often she had to prove herself, she would always have this: her family, their love, their strength. And in the end, that was enough. By the time Adam and Nathan finished their ride and returned to her, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. Nathan was still buzzing with excitement, chattering nonstop about how he had totally beat his dad in the bumper car race. Adam laughed, lifting Nathan onto his shoulders. "All right, champ. How about we go get some ice cream before we head home?" Nathan's eyes lit up. "Yes, chocolate with sprinkles." Maria smiled, watching them with a heart full of love. The shadows of the day still lingered, but they didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments where she would have to stand up for herself and her family. But with Adam and Nathan by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. As they made their way toward the ice cream stand, Maria took one last look at the Ferris wheel, now illuminated in the soft glow of twilight. It had been a long day, one filled with both pain and joy. But as she rolled forward, her hand resting on Adam's arm, she felt a deep sense of peace. They would face the world together, and together they would rise above it. The strength to move forward. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park as the day slowly drew to a close. Maria, Adam, and Nathan walked, or in Maria's case, rolled, toward the ice cream stand. The earlier tension had dissolved into the warm, familial moments that Maria cherished. Nathan's laughter still echoed in her ears, his excitement over the bumper cars evident as he recounted every detail of his victory over Adam with exaggerated flair. "Daddy didn't stand a chance," Nathan proclaimed, perched proudly on Adam's shoulders as they moved toward the stand. His small hands gripped Adam's head, playfully tussling his hair. Adam chuckled, casting an amused glance toward Maria. "Is that how it went down? I don't remember losing quite that badly." "You did, Daddy." Nathan giggled, leaning forward to whisper loudly. "But it's okay. You're still the best." Maria smiled, her heart swelling as she watched them together. It was moments like these that reminded her of the strength their family shared, a strength that went beyond the challenges they faced in public, beyond the misunderstandings and judgments of others. It was a strength that came from their love for each other, a bond that was unshakable no matter what the world threw at them. As they reached the ice cream stand, Adam gently lowered Nathan from his shoulders, setting him down so he could rush toward the counter with wide eyes. "Chocolate with sprinkles, please," Nathan called out eagerly, jumping up and down as the vendor smiled down at him. Adam turned to Maria, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "What about you? Ice cream sound good." Maria hesitated for a moment, still feeling the echoes of the day's earlier events tugging at the back of her mind. But then she caught a glimpse of Nathan's joy, the way his face lit up as the vendor handed him his treat, and she decided to let go, if only for a little while. "Vanilla with caramel drizzle," she said, smiling. "It's been a long day. I deserve it." Adam grinned and placed their order, then sat down next to Maria on a nearby bench as they waited for their ice cream. For a moment, they both sat in silence, watching the fading sunlight paint the sky in hues of pink and orange. The sounds of the park, laughter, music, the faint clatter of rides, drifted around them like a comforting hum. It felt peaceful, almost surreal after the earlier chaos. "You know," Adam said quietly, his voice thoughtful, "as much as today didn't go the way we planned, I'm proud of how you handled it." Maria looked at him, surprised by the sudden seriousness in his tone. "Proud of me?" Adam nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, you stood up for yourself in a way that most people wouldn't have. Even when they tried to make you doubt yourself, you didn't back down. And that takes a kind of strength not everyone has." Maria felt her throat tighten, not expecting the wave of emotion his words would bring. It was true, she had held her ground, but it hadn't felt like strength at the time. It had felt like survival, like the only option available to her in the face of doubt and discrimination. She had simply done what she had to do. "I didn't feel strong," she admitted, her voice soft. "I felt scared, angry, tired." Adam reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "That's what makes it even more powerful, Maria. You were all those things, and you still didn't let them win. You didn't let them make you feel like less than you are." Maria blinked back tears, grateful for his words, even if she hadn't fully realized how much she needed to hear them. She had spent so much of her life fighting against the boxes others tried to put her in, whether it was because of her race, her gender, or her physical condition. And every time she had to prove herself, it took a little more out of her. But today, with Adam and Nathan by her side, she had realized something important. She didn't have to prove herself to anyone but the people who mattered. As if sensing her thoughts, Adam leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're incredible, Maria, and you don't have to carry all of this alone." Maria looked into his eyes, seeing the love and unwavering support there. She knew he meant every word. Adam had always been her rock, her partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had built a life that was strong enough to withstand whatever the world threw at them. And in moments like these, Maria felt that strength more than ever. "I know," she whispered back, her voice filled with emotion. "And I'm grateful for you, every single day." Before Adam could respond, Nathan came running back with his ice cream cone, a wide grin on his face. "Mommy, look. It's got so many sprinkles." Maria laughed, wiping away the remnants of her tears before Nathan could notice. "Wow, that's a lot of sprinkles," she said, her heart lightening as she watched him dig into the treat with enthusiasm. Their ice cream arrived shortly after, and the three of them sat together on the bench, enjoying the sweet treats as the sun began to set. It was a simple moment, but for Maria, it was everything. It was a reminder that despite the hardships, despite the doubts and fears, they had each other. And that was more than enough. As they finished their ice cream, Nathan's energy seemed to be renewed. He stood up, bouncing on the balls of his feet as he looked around the park, searching for their next adventure. "Can we go to the carousel next? Please, just one more ride before we leave." Adam glanced at Maria, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes that mirrored her own. It had been a long day, and they both needed rest. But Nathan's hopeful expression tugged at her heart, and she couldn't say no to him. "One more ride," Maria agreed, smiling. "But after that, it's time to head home." Nathan whooped with excitement and dashed ahead, already making his way toward the carousel. Adam chuckled and stood, stretching his arms. "That kid's got more energy than both of us combined." Maria laughed softly, pushing her wheelchair forward as they followed Nathan toward the brightly lit carousel. The park was beginning to wind down, with fewer people milling about and the rides starting to close for the evening. But the carousel was still turning, its colorful horses rising and falling in a gentle rhythm as soft music played. They'd reached the carousel, and Nathan immediately ran to one of the horses near the edge, waving frantically for them to join him. Maria smiled, watching as Adam helped Nathan onto the horse before turning to her. "Do you want to ride too?" Adam asked, his tone light, but his eyes serious. Maria shook her head, the soft ache in her back reminding her that she'd already pushed her body further than usual today. "I'll watch from here," she said. "I think I'm done with rides for the day." Adam smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead before climbing onto a horse beside Nathan. As the carousel began to spin, Maria watched them, her heart full. She could see the way Nathan looked at Adam, the admiration and love in his eyes. And she could see the way Adam guided their son with gentle hands, always there to lift him up when he needed it. It was in that moment, watching the two people she loved most in the world, that Maria felt the full weight of her strength. It wasn't just the strength to endure the hardships or to face the prejudice that came her way. It was the strength to love fiercely, to protect her family, and to find joy in the moments that truly mattered. As the carousel turned and the music played softly in the background, Maria closed her eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the evening settle over her. She knew there would be more challenges ahead. There always were. But she also knew that, with Adam and Nathan by her side, she had the strength to face whatever came next. When the carousel ride ended and Nathan came running back to her, full of laughter and stories, Maria reached out and pulled him into her lap. She held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, and whispered into his ear, "You're my brave boy." Nathan beamed up at her, his eyes full of love. "I'm brave like you, Mommy." And in that moment, Maria knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they would always rise above it, together.